Updated for the MS-102 skills measured as of April 28, 2026. This MS-102 practice exam contains 45 expert-level questions. Read each scenario paragraph first, isolate the operational constraints, and choose the answer that satisfies every requirement. After the options, you will hear, "Lock in your answer." Then you get exactly 3 seconds of silence. Pause if you need more time. The reveal includes the complete correct answer, a concise explanation, and the full exam clue. Linked case context is read once and remains visible for its 3-question packet. Question 1 of 45. A connected Google Workspace environment contains files identified as highly confidential. After an incident exposed public sharing, security operations must detect all matching files that are currently public, including exposure created before the policy, continuously rescan them, alert at high severity, and remove public access through the connector. Which policy design meets the requirement? Option A, an activity policy that matches a single sharing activity with a daily alert limit and a governance action to remove public access. Option B, a cloud discovery anomaly detection policy filtered to storage traffic with the app marked unsanctioned. Option C, create a file policy filtered by classification and public access, generate high-severity alerts, and use the supported remove public access action. Option D, an OAuth app policy filtered by high permission level, with user consent revoked when a document is public. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C, create a file policy filtered by classification and public access, generate high-severity alerts, and use the supported remove public access action. A Defender for Cloud Apps file policy evaluates current at-rest file state and repeatedly scans connected app content so it can find matching files that were already public before the policy existed. For Google Workspace, the connector supports the remove public access governance action. Activity policies are event-oriented and don't reconstruct every current file state. This capability is current for the April 28, 2026 objective, but Microsoft documents retirement of Defender for Cloud Apps file policies on January 6, 2027, so it must be rechecked before later publication. Use a file policy for current at-rest state, but verify both the connector-specific governance action and the feature's lifecycle date. Question 2 of 45. Following token theft, Contoso creates a conditional access policy that requires a compliant device for Exchange Online. Report-only evidence shows that direct Outlook access would be blocked as intended. During validation, however, an unmanaged user can still expose related Microsoft 365 data through dependent experiences that obtain data or metadata from SharePoint Online and other services. Security must enforce one consistent device requirement across the Microsoft 365 service dependency chain without maintaining a growing list of individual resources. How should the administrator change the policy before enabling it? Option A, target the Microsoft 365, Office 365 application grouping. Retain the compliant device grant control, validate in report-only mode, and then enable the policy. Option B, target each current client application separately and exclude browser access so dependent services cannot request tokens. Option C, target Microsoft Graph only because every Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams request is authorized exclusively by the Graph resource. Option D, keep Exchange Online as the only target and add the Office 365 Exchange Online authentication context to the session controls. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Target the Microsoft 365, Office 365 application grouping. Retain the compliant device grant control, validate in report-only mode, and then enable the policy. Microsoft 365 services have resource dependencies. A user experience associated with one workload can request data or metadata from another resource. Microsoft recommends targeting the Microsoft 365 application grouping when a control must apply consistently across those dependencies. Retaining the compliant device grant, validating the broadened scope in report-only mode, and then enabling it follows a controlled deployment sequence. Targeting Exchange alone leaves dependency paths outside the policy, while client app conditions and Microsoft Graph are not substitutes for targeting all relevant service resources. Conditional access protects token requests to targeted resources, not a product name as users perceive it. When Microsoft 365 workload dependencies matter, target the Microsoft 365 grouping and stage the scope change through report-only evidence before enforcement. Question 3 of 45. Contoso has already configured pay-as-you-go billing for Microsoft 365 backup and has active protection policies for Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive. During a ransomware response, a recovery operator must create and manage restore tasks and monitor their progress. The operator must not manage billing, purchase services, or receive unrestricted tenant administration privileges. Which role assignment most directly provides the required access with least privilege? Option A, Global Administrator, because only the role that originally enabled Microsoft 365 backup can run restores. Option B, Microsoft 365 Backup Administrator, while leaving billing configuration with the separately authorized billing or Global Administrator. Option C, Exchange Administrator plus SharePoint Administrator, because workload roles jointly provide Microsoft 365 Backup restore access. Option D, Billing Administrator, because every restore task consumes metered backup capacity. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B, Microsoft 365 Backup Administrator, while leaving billing configuration with the separately authorized billing or Global Administrator. Microsoft 365 Backup separates service setup and billing authority from operational backup and restore administration. Once pay-as-you-go billing has been configured, the Microsoft 365 Backup Administrator role is the purpose-built least privilege assignment for managing protection and restore operations and viewing their status. The incident operator therefore does not need Global Administrator or billing authority. Workload administrator roles manage Exchange or SharePoint services, but do not combine to form the dedicated Microsoft 365 Backup permission boundary. Separate the Microsoft 365 Backup setup dependency from incident time operation. Billing authority enables the metered service, while Backup Administrator is the narrower role for protection, restore, and restore status work. Question 4 of 45. After an acquisition, a B2B guest becomes a cloud-only employee who must authenticate with a new internal account in Contoso's tenant. The existing external user object owns resources, belongs to response teams, has app assignments, and has investigation history that must remain bound to the same object. Security also requires the old external identity and its federated sign-in relationship to stop being the authentication authority. What should the identity administrator do? Option A, change the existing account's plus from guest to member and leave its external identity collection unchanged. Option B, create a new member account, transfer only group memberships, and permanently delete the guest after the first successful sign-in. Option C, reset the guest's redemption status and invite the employee's new internal email address. Option D, use external to internal user conversion for the existing object, supplying the required internal user principal name and authentication configuration. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Use external to internal user conversion for the existing object, supplying the required internal user principal name and authentication configuration. External to internal conversion changes how the existing user authenticates without deleting and recreating the object. The preserved object retains object-bound access and activity history, while the conversion establishes the required internal identity configuration and removes the external authentication relationship as documented. Merely changing URL changes an authorization-oriented classification, but does not convert authentication. Reset redemption preserves the external collaboration model, and creating a new member produces a different object that cannot inherently preserve ownership, direct assignments, or investigation continuity. Do not equate username with authentication source. When an acquisition requires internal authentication and the object ID must survive, convert the external object rather than toggling guest to member, resetting redemption, or recreating it. Question 5 of 45. Investigators confirm that users on onboarded Windows devices are uploading regulated files to personal storage sites. Contoso must block uploads to a defined set of personal storage domains in Microsoft Edge, while allowing uploads of the same files to all other websites. Users must also be prevented from bypassing that domain-specific decision by uploading the files through an unapproved browser. They should be directed to Edge, where the destination can be evaluated. Copying text into a web page is outside this control scope. Which two configurations should the administrator use? Choose two. Option A. Add the personal storage domains to sensitive service domains and reference that domain group in the endpoint DLP rules upload to cloud service restriction with block. Option B. Use the sensitive service domains list to block pasting matching text into the listed websites, as well as file uploads. Option C. Add Microsoft Edge to restricted apps and app groups, and configure Apply Restriction to All Activity as block. Option D. Add the personal storage domains to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Web Content Filtering, and omit the upload activity from the DLP rule. Option E. Add each unapproved browser executable to unallowed browsers, and enforce the upload to cloud services restriction for matching files. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and E. Option A. Add the personal storage domains to sensitive service domains and reference that domain group in the endpoint DLP rules upload to cloud service restriction with block. Option E. Add each unapproved browser executable to unallowed browsers and enforce the upload to cloud services restriction for matching files. Sensitive service domains provide the destination classification used by endpoint DLP to apply an upload restriction to specified websites, while leaving other destinations outside that domain group. Unallowed browsers close the ultimate browser path. When the upload to cloud services restriction is enforced for a matching file, listed browsers cannot access that file for upload and direct the user toward Microsoft Edge, where endpoint DLP can apply the domain-aware decision. These are unordered complementary controls. One defines the destination-specific rule, and the other constrains unsupported or unapproved browser handling. The service domain list applies to file uploads, not browser paste actions. Endpoint DLP browser control has two independent axes. Sensitive service domains classify where an Edge file upload is going, while unallowed browsers prevent a matching file from escaping that destination-aware path. Service domains do not govern browser paste. Question 6 of 45. Contoso uses Microsoft Entra B2B collaboration with Fabricam. An inbound cross-tenant access trust setting accepts MFA claims from Fabricam, and Contoso's conditional access policy requires MFA for guests who access SharePoint Online. During an incident, Fabricam confirms that its MFA enforcement was misconfigured. Contoso sign-in logs show Fabricam guests satisfying the grant from an external MFA claim. Contoso must keep those guests able to collaborate, but their next access must no longer satisfy Contoso's MFA requirement solely from Fabricam's claim. Other partner organizations must be unaffected. Which change should the identity administrator make? Option A. Exclude Fabricam guests from Contoso's conditional access policy and require Fabricam to attest by email that it has restored MFA. Option B. Disable MFA trust in Fabricam's inbound cross-tenant access settings, and keep Contoso's MFA conditional access policy. Option C. Disable outbound B2B collaboration for Contoso users to Fabricam, because outbound settings determine which Fabricam authentication claims Contoso accepts. Option D. Keep MFA trust enabled and add a sign-in frequency session control, because every forced reauthentication causes Contoso to ignore an external MFA claim. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Disable MFA trust in Fabricam's inbound cross-tenant access settings, and keep Contoso's MFA conditional access policy. Conditional access for a B2B guest is evaluated in the resource tenant, but an inbound cross-tenant access trust setting can allow that evaluation to accept an MFA claim from the guest's home tenant. The sign-in evidence identifies that trust decision as the failed dependency. Removing only the Fabricam-specific MFA trust prevents Fabricam's external claim from satisfying Contoso's MFA grant, while preserving the guest collaboration path and leaving other partners' trust settings unchanged. Contoso's existing policy then enforces the resource tenant's MFA requirement. This is narrower than blocking collaboration or weakening the policy, and it changes the claim acceptance boundary rather than merely prompting more often. For a guest who passes resource tenant conditional access with home tenant MFA, separate policy enforcement from claim trust. Remediate the partner-specific inbound MFA trust, not session cadence or outbound collaboration. Question 7 of 45. A merger team is preparing an ADDS forest for synchronization. IdFix reports duplicate proxy addresses values on privileged and ordinary accounts. Security policy prohibits the assessment operator from changing ADDS, and each proposed correction must be approved by the directory owner before any source object is edited. The team needs a reproducible findings artifact now. Synchronization must remain disabled until remediation is verified. What should the assessment operator do first? Option A. Grant the operator Enterprise Admin. Accept every IdFix suggested value and select Execute so that the assessment and remediation occur in one step. Option B. Enable Microsoft Entra Connect staging mode and export the duplicate values to Microsoft Entra ID, because staging mode prevents duplicate attributes from reaching the cloud directory. Option C. Run IdFix query with directory read access, export and preserve the findings for owner review, and have an appropriately authorized directory administrator correct approved values in ADDS before rerunning query. Option D. Delete the duplicate proxy address from the corresponding cloud object and use IdFix only after the first synchronization cycle. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Run IdFix query with directory read access, export and preserve the findings for owner review, and have an appropriately authorized directory administrator correct approved values in ADDS before rerunning query. IdFix query is the evidence-producing preparation step. It inspects the on-premises directory for attributes that can prevent synchronization and permits the findings to be reviewed and exported without executing directory changes. Because ADDS is authoritative and the operator is explicitly denied write authority, the operator should preserve the query output for approval and let an authorized directory administrator make only approved source corrections. A second query verifies that the defects are cleared before synchronization is enabled. The workflow separates discovery, authorization, remediation, and verification, avoiding both excessive privilege and an unreviewed bulk write. When IdFix discovery and AD remediation belong to different operators, preserve the query output as evidence, change only the authoritative source under approved write authority, and query again before sync. Question 8 of 45. During a supplier compromise, responders discover that the external email address on the mail contact named Northwind Incident Desk was changed to an attacker-controlled domain. The contact has no sign-in credentials or mailbox, appears in the organization's address list, and is a member of an incident notification distribution group. Northwind has supplied a verified replacement SMTP address. Contoso must preserve the same address book recipient and group membership, while redirecting future messages to the verified external destination. What should the Microsoft 365 administrator do? Option A. Reset the contact's password, revoke its sessions, and change its user principal name to the verified Northwind address. Option B. Convert the mail contact to a shared mailbox and configure external forwarding to Northwind so the object retains its group membership. Option C. Delete the mail contact and invite the replacement address as a B2B guest, because only guest users can receive mail sent to a distribution group. Option D. Update the existing mail contact's external email address to the verified SMTP address and send a controlled test message. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Update the existing mail contact's external email address to the verified SMTP address and send a controlled test message. A mail contact is a mail-enabled directory recipient that represents a person or organization outside Microsoft 365. It has an external target address, but no Microsoft 365 sign-in or mailbox. Editing the existing contact's external email address changes where Exchange Online routes future messages, while preserving the contact object that appears in the address list and is already a distribution group member. A controlled test validates the corrected routing dependency. Replacing the object, creating credentials, or introducing a mailbox changes identity, membership, or data handling scope unnecessarily. If an address list object has an external routing target but no mailbox or credentials, contain a destination compromise by editing the mail contact's external email address. Do not invent a user, guest, or mailbox lifecycle. Question 9 of 45. A Defender for Cloud Apps alert cites one SharePoint file download activity ID. The same user performed hundreds of legitimate downloads through an approved automation client during the surrounding minute, and several events share the same IP address and file name. Before revoking the user's sessions, the analyst must isolate the exact event that generated the alert and determine from the connected app's original fields whether the request came from the approved client or an interactive browser. Which investigation path provides the most precise evidence? Option A. Search Cloud Discovery by the SharePoint app name and use the app's risk score to determine which client issued the individual download. Option B. Filter the activity log by the cited activity ID. Open that activity and inspect its user agent, device data, and raw activity data before correlating the finding with the alert. Option C. Filter the activity log by file name. Select every matching event and revoke the user's sessions before examining event-level details. Option D. Filter only by the shared IP address and assume the newest result is the alerting event because activity log results are grouped into one session per IP. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Filter the activity log by the cited activity ID, open that activity, and inspect its user agent, device details, and raw activity data before correlating the finding with the alert. The activity ID is the narrow event identifier supplied by the alert, so it should be used before broader pivots that can return many neighboring actions. Opening that exact activity log record exposes normalized context, such as user agent and device information. Raw activity data preserves the fields received from the connected app and can confirm how the request was represented at the source. The analyst can then correlate that evidence with the alert and choose a proportionate response. IP address, object name, and app-level discovery risk are useful pivots, but none uniquely identifies the cited event or proves its client path. When an alert supplies an activity ID, use it to collapse the activity log to one event. Normalized fields support quick interpretation, while raw activity data answers what the connected app actually sent. Question 10 of 45. Contoso detects that a compromised hybrid administrator changed access to incident response resources and altered the on-premises OU used for responder synchronization. The response team collaborates in the private Microsoft 365 group IR Operations and receives external case reports in the shared mailbox case intake. Responders receive Microsoft 365 E5 through the Cloud Security Group IR Licensed. The tenant uses Microsoft Entra Connect Sync, and accidental deletion prevention is enabled with a threshold of 500 objects. Audit evidence shows that the attacker removed the 6 responders from IR operations and revoked their access to case intake. The responders must regain access to the group's conversations and files, and they must be able to read and manage messages in case intake. They must not be able to change group membership or send mail as case intake. Which 2 actions restore the required access with least privilege? Choose 2. Option A. Add the 6 responders as owners of IR operations. Option B. Grant the 6 responders send as to case intake without granting full access. Option C. Add the 6 responders as members but not owners of IR operations. Option D. Grant the 6 responders full access to case intake without granting send as or send on behalf. Option E. Convert case intake to a Microsoft 365 group and make the 6 responders owners. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are C and D. Option C. Add the 6 responders as members but not owners of IR operations. Option D. Grant the 6 responders full access to case intake without granting send as or send on behalf. Microsoft 365 group membership gives the responders access to the private group's conversations and connected resources, while owner status would also permit group management changes that the scenario excludes. For the shared mailbox, full access permits opening the mailbox and managing its contents. Full access does not implicitly grant send as or send on behalf, so withholding those separate delegation permissions preserves the prohibition on sending under the case intake identity. The 2 selections address independent access planes and are unordered. Separate collaboration membership from administration, and mailbox opening from sender identity. Group member, group owner, full access, send as, and send on behalf are distinct grants. Question 11 of 45. The attacker moved an OU containing 742 responder and service accounts outside the configured Connect Sync domain-based filtering scope. The next export stopped, and the Synchronization Service Manager reports that the accidental deletion threshold was exceeded. Investigators confirm that the on-premises objects themselves were not deleted. No emergency export of deletions is authorized. Which recovery sequence restores the intended synchronization scope without bypassing the deletion safeguard? Option A. Delete and reinstall Microsoft Entra Connect Sync, select the current database, and run an export before importing from Active Directory. Option B. Move the OU back into the configured synchronization scope, run an initial synchronization cycle, verify that the pending deletion count is below the threshold, and then allow export. Option C. Install a CloudSync agent for the same OU and let CloudSync recreate the 742 objects while ConnectSync retains authority for the forest. Option D. Disable accidental deletion prevention, run a Delta synchronization cycle to export all 742 deletions, and then move the OU back into scope. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Move the OU back into the configured synchronization scope. Run an initial synchronization cycle, verify that the pending deletion count is below the threshold, and then allow export. The threshold is acting as a safety control, not reporting 742 confirmed source deletions. Restoring the OU to the intended Connect Sync filtering scope first corrects the attacker's configuration change. An initial cycle reevaluates the full scope and joins before export. The operator should then confirm that the pending deletion count has fallen below the configured threshold. This preserves object authority and the safeguard instead of exporting the attack-induced deletions. When accidental deletion prevention fires after a scope change, correct and fully reevaluate the source scope before export. Do not treat the threshold as permission to disable the guardrail. Question 12 of 45. During containment, analyst Dana is removed from IR licensed. After group license processing completes, Dana still has Microsoft 365 E5 and can use its services. Dana's license details show Microsoft 365 E5 with 2 assignment paths, IR licensed and a direct assignment. The group path is now marked for removal, but the direct path remains active. Other former members who had no direct assignment lost E5 as expected. What should the license administrator do to remove Dana's E5 service access while preserving the group-based assignment for current responders? Option A. Delete the Microsoft 365 E5 assignment from IR-licensed and recreate it after Dana's access disappears. Option B. Remove the direct Microsoft 365 E5 assignment from Dana and verify that no other active assignment path grants the product. Option C. Reprocess the IR-licensed group assignment until it overrides Dana's direct assignment. Option D. Disable the Exchange Online service plan in IR-licensed so that every current responder's E5 assignment supersedes Dana's direct assignment. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Remove the direct Microsoft 365 E5 assignment from Dana and verify that no other active assignment path grants the product. A product remains assigned while at least one independent assignment path still applies. The completed group removal path and the successful removals for users without direct assignments show that group processing is functioning. Dana's surviving direct E5 assignment is the remaining grant, so removing that direct assignment and checking for any other paths removes access without disrupting the responder group's licensing configuration. License removal is path-based. Membership removal eliminates only the inherited path, so inspect all assignment sources before diagnosing group processing or changing the group-wide product configuration. Question 13 of 45. Incident response must disable 620 confirmed compromised cloud-only member accounts from an immutable list of Microsoft Entra object IDs. A certificate-authenticated Microsoft Graph PowerShell runbook will perform the action. The runbook must not gain permission to modify groups or applications, must avoid one failed account preventing later accounts from being processed, and must record the HTTP result for every disable request. State that none of the 620 target accounts has an administrator role. None of the target accounts holds a Microsoft Entra administrator role. Which design best meets the requirements? Option A. Grant the runbook directory read-write all. Send all 620 account-enabled changes as one Microsoft Graph JSON batch, and treat the batch's top-level status as the result for every user. Option B. Grant user read-write all only. Submit one parallel request for every account without throttling, and infer success from the PowerShell process exit code. Option C. Assign global administrator to the service principal. Pipe the object IDs to remove MG user and restore each account after the incident is closed. Option D. Grant user.enable-disable account all and user.read all plus user administrator. Send patch operations in 20 request JSON batches and log each result. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Grant user-enabled disable account all and user.read all plus user administrator. Send patch operations in 20 request JSON batches and log each result. For app-only updates to account enabled, Microsoft Graph requires user-enabled disable account all plus user.read all. Because disabling accounts is a sensitive action, the service principal also needs an appropriate Entra role. User administrator is sufficient for the explicitly non-admin targets. Microsoft Graph JSON $batch accepts at most 20 independent subrequests, each with its own result. The runbook must inspect every subresponse and retry only failed or throttled requests. For app-only account disabling, validate Graph application permissions, the service principal's Entra role and target hierarchy, and per subrequest results in JSON batching. Question 14 of 45. A high-severity endpoint DLP alert reports that an engineer copied a regulated design file to removable media from an onboarded Windows device. The event details confirm the file, device, user, rule, and copy action. The engineer denies the activity, and Defender for Endpoint shows a concurrent hands-on keyboard alert on the same device. The compliance analyst can investigate and update DLP alerts, but cannot perform endpoint response actions. What should the analyst do next to preserve evidence and initiate containment through the correct control plane? Option A. Change the DLP policy from audit to block, and assume that the policy change retroactively isolates the device and removes the copied file. Option B. Dismiss the DLP alert as a false positive, and create an Exchange mail flow rule to block the engineer's future removable media activity. Option C. Assign the DLP alert, record the validated event and the correlated Defender evidence in the alert, and escalate the device to an authorized Defender for Endpoint operator for containment. Option D. Resolve the DLP alert as remediated, because Endpoint DLP automatically deletes the removable media copy when an alert is generated. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Assign the DLP alert, record the validated event and the correlated Defender evidence in the alert, and escalate the device to an authorized Defender for Endpoint operator for containment. The DLP event is authoritative evidence of the governed data action. But a DLP alert and its workflow status are not endpoint isolation controls. The analyst should preserve triage ownership, notes, and correlated evidence in the DLP response workflow. Then hand off device containment to a Defender for Endpoint operator who has the required response permissions. This keeps the compliance evidence and endpoint response control planes distinct while maintaining a defensible sequence. Treat a DLP alert as evidence and case workflow, not as universal remediation. Preserve the matched activity, then invoke the workload that owns the required containment action. Question 15 of 45. Fabricam is separating Microsoft 365 incident duties among 3 permanent teams. The triage team must investigate alerts and incidents and take permitted response actions, but it must not change tenant-wide security configuration. The engineering team must manage security policies and settings across Microsoft 365 services. The audit team must read configuration and administrative information across Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Entra ID without making changes. Match each team requirement to the least privileged Microsoft Entra built-in role. Each target may be used once. Some targets are not used. Requirements. R1. Investigate security alerts and incidents and perform permitted response actions without managing security configuration. R2. Manage security policies and settings across Microsoft 365 services. R3. Read settings and administrative information across Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Entra ID without making changes. Targets. T1, Security Operator. T2, Global Reader. T3, Security Administrator. T4, Global Administrator. T5, Security Reader. Lock in your answer. The complete correct mapping is R1 maps to T1. Investigate security alerts and incidents and perform permitted response actions without managing security configuration. Maps to Security Operator. R2 maps to T3. Manage security policies and settings across Microsoft 365 services. Maps to Security Administrator. R3 maps to T2. read settings and administrative information across Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Entra ID without making changes. Maps to Global Reader. Security Operator is the response-oriented role. It can investigate security alerts and take supported remediation actions without receiving the broader authority to configure security settings. Security Administrator is the configuration role for managing security policies and reviewing security information across Microsoft 365 services. Global Reader supplies broad read-only visibility across Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Entra administrative surfaces, fitting the audit requirement without write authority. Map the operational verb before the workload. Respond points to Security Operator, Configure Security points to Security Administrator, and tenant-wide Inspect Without Change points to Global Reader. Question 16 of 45. During containment of an identity system intrusion, responders block all outbound internet access from the Microsoft Entra Connect sync server, except destinations explicitly approved by the network team. Synchronization Service Manager still shows successful imports, synchronization, and exports, and test changes reach Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra Connect Health, however, stops receiving current performance data from that server and raises an agent connectivity condition. Operations must restore monitoring without changing synchronization rules or granting the responder tenant-wide administrative access. What should the team do first? Option A. Open only the documented outbound HTTPS destinations required by the Connect Health agent. Then verify the agent's connectivity and current data in Connect Health. Option B. Grant the responder Global Administrator and reinstall Microsoft Entra Connect Sync so the health service can read the connector configuration. Option C. Change the server from staging mode to active mode, because Connect Health suppresses telemetry from any server that is not the current export server. Option D. Run a full synchronization cycle, because Connect Health telemetry is included only with a full import and full synchronization. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Open only the documented outbound HTTPS destinations required by the Connect Health agent. Then verify the agent's connectivity and current data in Connect Health. The successful local run history and confirmed cloud changes prove that the synchronization engine is still processing and exporting objects. The missing Connect Health data began when outbound access was restricted, so the failed layer is the health agent's communication with its Microsoft Entra service endpoints. Restoring only the documented outbound HTTPS path and validating agent connectivity repairs monitoring while preserving the sync configuration and least privilege. A full sync does not transport health telemetry. Reinstalling the sync engine is disproportionate, and staging mode does not inherently prevent a server from being monitored by Connect Health. When object exports succeed but Connect Health data becomes stale, split the data plane from the monitoring plane. Preserve the sync engine, and repair the health agent's outbound service path first. Question 17 of 45. After source code fragments were posted to an internal chat, Contoso must build a custom sensitive information type for emergency signing records. A true record contains a token formatted SIG followed by 12 hexadecimal characters, and within 100 characters, one term from a maintained list of incident-specific phrases, such as emergency signer, break glass release, or compromised key. The token is the required evidence. The phrase list should reduce false positives and must be editable without rewriting the token expression. Content that contains only a phrase must not match. Which pattern design meets the requirement? Option A. Combine the token syntax and every phrase into one primary regular expression and omit supporting evidence and proximity. Option B. Use the phrase list as the primary element and the token regular expression as supporting evidence, with a 100-character proximity window. Option C. Use a regular expression for the token as the primary element and a keyword list as supporting evidence, with a 100-character proximity window. Option D. Create one keyword list containing both the phrases and a literal entry for SIG 0-9A-F12 and require 2 keyword matches. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Use a regular expression for the token as the primary element and a keyword list as supporting evidence with a 100-character proximity window. A custom sensitive information type pattern requires a primary element, and a match cannot occur without that primary evidence. The regex can enforce the variable token's fixed SIG prefix and 12 hexadecimal characters, so it belongs in the primary position. A keyword list is appropriate for the maintained incident vocabulary and can serve as supporting evidence inside the specified proximity window. This design makes the token mandatory, keeps vocabulary maintenance separate from syntax, and prevents phrase-only content from matching. In a Purview custom sensitive information type, the primary element is the non-optional evidence. Put variable syntax in a regex primary and use an independently maintained keyword list as nearby corroboration. Question 18 of 45. Following discovery of command and control traffic through an unapproved web service, Fabricam must continuously analyze egress logs from 4 supported firewalls in isolated network zones. The firewalls can send syslog to an internal host, but cannot connect to the internet. Security permits one hardened Linux host to make outbound HTTPS connections through the corporate proxy. The design must avoid manual snapshot uploads and must preserve coverage for servers, appliances, and unmanaged devices. Which cloud discovery configuration should the administrator implement? Option A. Deploy a Defender for Cloud Apps log collector on the Linux host. Receive each firewall's syslog and upload through the HTTPS proxy. Option B. Create one app connector per firewall, so Defender for Cloud Apps can retrieve the firewall logs through each vendor's SaaS API. Option C. Schedule each firewall to email a traffic log snapshot to Defender for Cloud Apps whenever its local file reaches the upload limit. Option D. Install the Defender for Endpoint sensor on the Linux host and use endpoint-based discovery to ingest every firewall's syslog stream. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Deploy a Defender for Cloud Apps log collector on the Linux host. Receive each firewall's syslog and upload through the HTTPS proxy. Automatic log upload for continuous cloud discovery uses a Defender for Cloud Apps log collector. The firewalls can send supported syslog formats to the internal collector without internet access, while the collector uses the permitted outbound HTTPS path, including proxy configuration when required, to upload processed logs. Data sources and receiver mappings preserve the identity of each source. This architecture covers traffic from unmanaged devices and non-endpoint systems and avoids the evidentiary gaps of manual snapshots. For continuous discovery, where traffic sources can reach only an internal host, separate log delivery from cloud egress. Firewalls feed the collector locally, and the collector alone uploads over outbound HTTPS through the proxy. Question 19 of 45. An attacker used a Microsoft Teams incident channel to post instructions and uploaded tooling to the channel's Files tab, then deleted both the posts and the files. Legal now requires future content in designated incident response teams to remain discoverable for 5 years, even if users delete it. Administrators must cover both the team's conversations and the files stored for the teams. Users should not have to apply labels during an active incident. Which retention design meets the requirement? Option A. Apply a 5-year default retention label only to the SharePoint document libraries behind the teams, because preserving each uploaded file also preserves the related channel conversation. Option B. Publish one mandatory retention label to the team owners, and rely on that label to retain channel messages and Files tab documents. Option C. Create one 5-year retention policy for the designated Teams channel messages and a separate 5-year retention policy for the corresponding SharePoint Teams sites. Option D. Create a retention policy for Exchange user mailboxes and OneDrive accounts, because Teams stores every channel post and channel file in those two user locations. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Create one 5-year retention policy for the designated Teams channel messages and a separate 5-year retention policy for the corresponding SharePoint team sites. Teams channel messages and standard channel files occupy different retention locations. Channel messages require a Teams channel messages retention policy, while Files tab documents reside in SharePoint and require a separate SharePoint retention policy. Microsoft Purview doesn't allow Teams locations to be combined with non-Teams locations in the same retention policy. The two policies can apply automatically without requiring users to label content. Teams conversations and Files tab documents require different retention locations, and Teams locations can't be combined with SharePoint in the same retention policy. Question 20 of 45. Cloud Discovery reports heavy traffic to a newly cataloged collaboration service from both Defender for Endpoint onboarded laptops and unmanaged laboratory workstations. After reviewing the app's risk factors and affected users, Incident Response decides that no device may use the service. Defender for Endpoint integration and network protection are already enabled for the managed laptops. The perimeter firewall supports importing a Defender for Cloud Apps block script. The response must enforce the decision across both populations while preserving the discovered app evidence. Which two actions should the administrator take? Choose two. Option A. Delete the continuous discovery report so cached app access is removed from all reporting devices. Option B. Revoke user consent for the app in OAuth App Management, so every network session to the service is blocked. Option C. Exclude the laboratory IP range from Cloud Discovery before marking the app unsanctioned to prevent duplicate enforcement events. Option D. Generate the block script for the unsanctioned app and import it into the perimeter firewall to enforce the decision for unmanaged laboratory traffic. Option E. Mark the discovered app as unsanctioned so the integrated Defender for Endpoint control can enforce the app decision on supported onboarded devices. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are D and E. Option D. Generate the block script for the unsanctioned app and import it into the perimeter firewall to enforce the decision for unmanaged laboratory traffic. Option E. Mark the discovered app as unsanctioned so the integrated Defender for Endpoint control can enforce the app decision on supported onboarded devices. An unsanctioned tag records the Cloud Discovery governance decision and, with the stated Defender for Endpoint integration and network protection prerequisites, can enforce that decision on supported onboarded endpoints. Unmanaged laboratory workstations are outside that endpoint enforcement scope, so the administrator must also export or generate the Defender for Cloud Apps block script and implement it on the supported perimeter appliance. These actions are complementary and unordered. One governs the managed endpoint path and the other the network path, while the discovery report remains available as evidence. An unsanctioned decision is enforced only through an attached control plane. Use Defender for Endpoint for supported onboarded devices, and push the generated block artifact to the network appliance for unmanaged traffic. Question 21 of 45. A responder can investigate and update incidents in Microsoft Defender XDR through a narrowly scoped unified RBAC assignment. During a token theft investigation, the responder must also search and export Microsoft Purview audit records to establish whether the compromised account changed mailbox rules. The responder must not configure audit retention, DLP, sensitivity labels, or e-discovery cases, and the existing Defender permissions must remain unchanged. Which access change meets the requirement with least privilege? Option A. Add the responder to the Audit Reader role group in Microsoft Purview while retaining the existing Defender Unified RBAC assignment. Option B. Assign Compliance Administrator in Microsoft Entra ID and remove the Defender Unified RBAC assignment, so one tenant role governs both investigation surfaces. Option C. Expand the responder's Defender Unified RBAC assignment to all device groups because Defender Resource Scope controls access to Purview audit searches. Option D. Add the responder to the Audit Manager role group in Microsoft Purview so the responder can search records without receiving audit configuration permissions. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Add the responder to the Audit Reader role group in Microsoft Purview while retaining the existing Defender Unified RBAC assignment. Microsoft Defender Unified RBAC and Microsoft Purview role groups are separate authorization planes. Expanding a Defender assignment cannot confer permission to search Purview Audit. The Audit Reader role group is designed for users who need to search and export audit records, whereas Audit Manager includes broader audit management capabilities. Retaining the narrow Defender assignment and adding Audit Reader supplies the missing evidence permission without granting configuration authority in audit or unrelated Purview solutions. It also avoids replacing workload-specific operational access with a broad tenant role. When one investigation crosses Defender XDR and Purview Audit, preserve each authorization boundary. Defender Scope governs Defender operations, while Audit Reader supplies search and export evidence without Audit Manager's configuration authority. Question 22 of 45. Microsoft Secure Score lists several high-point improvement actions, but the exposure management team has identified an active attack path from an internet-facing device through a service account to a critical certificate authority. The path contains a lower point recommendation on the service account that, if remediated, would disrupt that path. Operations can complete only one change before the next maintenance freeze and must prioritize reduction of the demonstrated route to the critical asset rather than maximize this week's score increase. Which action should the team take first? Option A. Mark the service account recommendation as accepted risk in Secure Score so its points no longer compete with the higher scoring action. Option B. Implement the highest point Secure Score improvement action because point value proves that it is the control with the greatest effect on this attack path. Option C. Wait for a Defender XDR incident to correlate the three assets before changing the service account, because an attack path represents only alerts that have already fired. Option D. Remediate the service account recommendation shown on the active attack path, then review the path after exposure data refreshes to verify that the route is disrupted. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Remediate the service account recommendation shown on the active attack path. Then review the path after exposure data refreshes to verify that the route is disrupted. An exposure management attack path models how an attacker could traverse relationships and weaknesses to reach a critical asset. Its value here is contextual prioritization. The service account recommendation is a choke point on a demonstrated route, even though its standalone Secure Score value is lower. Remediating that recommendation aligns the action with the stated risk objective, and reviewing the path after data refresh supplies evidence that the route was actually disrupted. Secure Score points quantify posture progress for improvement actions. They do not prove which action breaks a particular path. Attack paths are proactive exposure findings and do not depend on an incident having fired. When the business objective names a route to a critical asset, prioritize the recommendation that severs that route, and verify the refreshed path. Secure Score points rank posture value, not guaranteed path disruption. Question 23 of 45. After an insider risk investigation, Contoso finds that users legitimately relabel some highly confidential Office documents as internal after review. But the current label policy allows the downgrade with no recorded business reason. Compliance must continue permitting authorized users to downgrade or remove a label when necessary, require them to enter a reason at the time of the change, and retain that reason in audit activity for later investigation. Existing label encryption and markings must not be redesigned. What should the compliance administrator configure? Option A. Change the highly confidential label's encryption permissions so users cannot remove protection, because encryption permissions generate the downgrade justification audit field. Option B. Enable automatic labeling for highly confidential and run it in simulation mode, because simulation captures each user's downgrade reason before relabeling content. Option C. In the sensitivity label policy, require users to provide justification when they remove a label or lower its classification. Option D. Configure mandatory labeling and a default highly confidential label, because mandatory labeling records a justification whenever a user selects a lower label. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. In the sensitivity label policy, require users to provide justification when they remove a label or lower its classification. The label policy setting that requires justification for removing a label or lowering its classification directly implements the required interaction. Users can still make a legitimate downgrade or removal, but must provide a reason, and the action and justification are available in auditing for investigation. This is a publication policy behavior, so it does not require changing the label's encryption or visual marking configuration. Mandatory labeling ensures that an item is labeled. A default label supplies an initial choice, and automatic labeling simulation evaluates content. None of those controls by itself requests and records the user's business reason for a downgrade. If downgrading must remain possible but attributable, use the label Policies Downgrade/Removal Justification Control. Mandatory, default, and automatic labeling answer whether a label is applied, not why a user lowered it. Question 24 of 45. Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync provisions users from two ADDs domains through separate agent groups. Users from domain A stopped updating, while domain B continues normally. In the Cloud Sync configuration for domain A, the agent status is healthy, but the provisioning logs show repeated export failures for specific users after a source directory attribute was populated with values that violate the target attribute's format. Security operations must preserve the failed event evidence, avoid changing the healthy domain, and restore synchronization from the authoritative source. What should the identity administrator do first? Option A. Restart every Cloud Sync agent in both domains, because a healthy agent status cannot coexist with an object-level export error. Option B. Edit the affected Microsoft Entra user attributes directly and leave the invalid ADDS values unchanged, so the next Cloud Sync cycle confirms the cloud correction. Option C. Recreate the domain A agent group before reviewing individual provisioning events, because agent group replacement is the required response to any repeated export failure. Option D. Use the domain A provisioning log failures to identify the affected source values, correct those values in ADDS, and run an on-demand provision for a corrected user before allowing the normal cycle to process the remaining objects. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Use the domain A provisioning log failures to identify the affected source values, correct those values in ADDS, and run an on-demand provision for a corrected user before allowing the normal cycle to process the remaining objects. Cloud Sync provisioning logs provide object-level status and error details, while Agent Health describes a synchronization infrastructure. A healthy agent alongside failures tied to particular attribute values indicates a data problem, not an agent outage. The administrator should preserve and use the failed events to identify the bad values, remediate the authoritative ADDS objects, and test one corrected object with on-demand provisioning. This confines the response to domain A, validates the fix before broad processing, and prevents the source from overwriting a cloud-only edit on a later cycle. Restarting or replacing healthy agents does not make an invalid target value valid. In Cloud Sync, healthy agent plus failed provisioning events means separate transport health from object data. fix the authoritative value named by the log, then prove the correction with on-demand provisioning before broad recovery. Question 25 of 45. Contoso is responding to a suspected insider-assisted data theft. The response population consists of cloud-only accounts in the security group Tier 0 responders. Investigators use Microsoft Defender XDR and Microsoft Purview. A sensitivity label named Acquisition Restricted protects merger documents in Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and Teams. During containment, tenant administrators must not be able to alter the responders' identities merely because they hold a tenant-wide user management role. A small identity response team will receive explicit scoped authority. The sensitivity label report shows that the number of items labeled Acquisition Restricted fell sharply during the incident window. Investigators must identify the users and workloads associated with label removals or downgrades during that window, and separately obtain the current item-level locations of content that still carries the label. They do not need to preview file or message contents. Which two investigation paths provide the required evidence? Choose two. Option A. Use Content Explorer's current item list to infer who removed labels from items that no longer appear in that list. Option B. Use Content Explorer, scoped to Acquisition Restricted, to enumerate the current matching items and their locations without using Content Preview permission. Option C. Use the sensitivity label report alone and export its aggregate label counts as both the activity history and the current item inventory. Option D. Use Microsoft Defender XDR Advanced Hunting to reconstruct every Purview label change from device network events and treat the results as the current content inventory. Option E. Use Activity Explorer to filter the incident time range for sensitivity label change activities, then pivot by user, workload, and label. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B and E. Option B. Use Content Explorer, scoped to Acquisition Restricted, to enumerate the current matching items and their locations without using Content Preview permission. Option E. Use Activity Explorer to filter the incident time range for sensitivity label change activities, then pivot by user, workload, and label. Activity Explorer and Content Explorer answer different evidentiary questions. Activity Explorer exposes recorded classification and labeling activities over time, and can be filtered to identify label changes, actors, workloads, and the affected label during the incident window. Content Explorer inventories content by classification and location, so filtering it to Acquisition Restricted supplies the current item-level locations of content that still has that label. Content Preview is a separate permission and is unnecessary when metadata and location are sufficient. The two selections are complementary and unordered. One establishes change history, while the other establishes current classified content state. Separate classification state from classification history. Content Explorer answers where matching content is now, while Activity Explorer answers who performed a labeling action, when, and in which workload. A report is the aggregate signal that prompts those pivots. Question 26 of 45. The incident contains an identity alert for one Tier 0 responders account and a Defender for Endpoint alert for encoded PowerShell on-device IR17. The incident graph does not establish which process contacted the attacker domain. Advanced Hunting shows a device network events row for that domain on IR17 and supplies the initiating process identifier, but no alert exists for that process. The analyst must preserve a reproducible evidence chain and determine whether that process created child processes before deciding whether to isolate the device. Which investigation sequence best meets the requirement? Option A. Save the device network events query in time range. Correlate its device and initiating process IDs in device process events, record the chain, then contain if warranted. Option B. Create a custom detection from a query that returns only a count of domain connections, because an aggregate result retains the row-level device and process entities required for automated response. Option C, search only alert info for the attacker domain, because advanced hunting entity tables contain every raw process and network event that belongs to an incident. Option D, close the identity alert as resolved. Isolate IR17 from the incident page, and then search device events by the alert title to infer the initiating process. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A, save the device network events query and time range. Correlate its device and initiating process IDs in device process events. Record the chain, then contain if warranted. Advanced hunting is the raw telemetry investigation layer when the incident graph lacks the required relationship. The network event row supplies concrete join pivots, device identity, time, and initiating process identifiers. Correlating those values with device process events can establish the relevant parent-child execution chain without assuming that an alert already exists for every event. Saving the query and time boundary and recording the resulting evidence makes the finding reproducible. Containment follows evidence and remains subject to the analyst's response permissions. Hunting a device does not itself authorize or perform isolation. When an incident is missing a relationship, pivot from the most specific raw event identifiers into the table that records the next link. Do not search alert metadata for activity that never generated an alert, and do not contain before preserving the chain. Question 27 of 45. Investigators confirmed that the compromised account held a tenant-scoped user administrator assignment. Contoso must protect the Tier 0 responder's user objects from modification by ordinary tenant-scoped identity administrators. Only the identity response team may reset authentication methods and manage other supported user properties for those responders. The team must receive no authority over users outside that population, and Global Administrator must not be used for routine response. The Tier 0 responders accounts hold no Microsoft Entra administrator roles, and the identity response administrators have Microsoft Entra ID P1 licenses. Which delegation design best enforces the required management boundary? Option A. Keep the users outside administrative units, assign directory readers to the identity response team, and rely on the Tier 0 responders security group ownership setting to block tenant administrators. Option B. Create a standard administrative unit, assign global administrator at its scope, and remove every tenant-wide user administrator assignment before each incident response shift. Option C. Create a restricted management administrative unit, add the responder user objects directly, and assign user administrator to the identity response team at that unit's scope. Option D. Create a standard administrative unit containing Tier 0 responders and assign user administrator to the identity response team at that unit's scope. Tenant-scoped user administrators will then be unable to modify the members. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Create a restricted management administrative unit, add the responder user objects directly, and assign user administrator to the identity response team at that unit scope. A restricted management administrative unit protects its members from administrators who hold applicable roles only at tenant scope. The responder user objects must be added directly. Scoping a group object doesn't implicitly scope its members. Because the targets are explicitly non-admin users, user administrator at the restricted unit scope supplies the required user and authentication management without authority outside the population. Administrators of restricted management administrative units require Microsoft Entra ID P1, which the scenario supplies. Administrative unit scoping normally constrains the delegated operator, not higher scope administrators. When the requirement is to shield member objects from ordinary tenant-scoped admins, the decisive phrase is Restricted Management Administrative Unit. Question 28 of 45. The Defender for Endpoint Attack Surface Reduction Rules report shows a surge of events for Office applications creating executable content on a finance device group. The Detections view identifies the rule and affected devices, but the Configuration view shows that the rule is in audit mode for that group. An active campaign now uses the same behavior. Responders must enforce prevention for the finance group without claiming that the historical audit events were blocked, and they must verify the effect after policy deployment. Which response is most appropriate? Option A, suppress the rule in the report for the finance group, because report suppression converts audit events into enforcement without changing endpoint policy. Option B, change the rule to block for the scoped finance policy in the managing service, confirm policy application in the report's configuration evidence, and monitor subsequent detections and device evidence for block outcomes. Option C, isolate every device listed in the historical report and leave the rule in audit mode, because device isolation permanently prevents Office applications from creating executable content. Option D, treat every reported detection as a successful block and close the issue, because the Detections view lists only prevented executions. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Change the rule to block for the scoped finance policy in the managing service, confirm policy application in the report's configuration evidence, and monitor subsequent detections and device evidence for block outcomes. The ASR report separates observed rule events from configuration state. Audit mode records behavior that would have matched but does not block it, so historical audit detections cannot be represented as prevented executions. Because the campaign is active, the administrator should change the rule action to block in the management plane for the intended finance scope. Configuration evidence then verifies that enforcement reached the devices, while subsequent detections and device-level evidence establish actual block outcomes. Report filtering or suppression cannot deploy a control, and broad isolation is a temporary containment action rather than a replacement for scoped preventive policy. Read an ASR report on two axes. Detections show matched behavior, while configuration state tells whether that match audited or blocked. Change enforcement in the management plane, then verify deployment and new outcomes separately. Question 29 of 45. A supplier reports a newly observed command and control host that has not generated an alert in Fabricam's tenant. Before proposing a block, the threat intelligence analyst must determine whether the host belongs to broader attacker infrastructure by reviewing its reputation and pivoting through infrastructure relationships such as domains, certificates, and historical resolution data. Tenant telemetry must then be checked separately to determine whether Fabricam encountered the validated infrastructure. Which investigation approach preserves those evidence boundaries? Option A. Use Defender Vulnerability Management Software Inventory to reconstruct passive DNS and whois history. Then remediate every endpoint whose exposure score changed. Option B. Use the Microsoft Secure Score history to enumerate domains and certificates related to the host. Then interpret a missing improvement action as proof that the tenant was not exposed. Option C. Create block indicators for every related observable before reviewing reputation or tenant sightings, because infrastructure relationships in Defender threat intelligence prove maliciousness and local exposure. Option D. Use Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence to search the host and pivot through its infrastructure relationships. Validate the resulting observables, and then hunt the validated set in Defender XDR tenant telemetry before selecting response actions. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Use Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence to search the host and pivot through its infrastructure relationships. Validate the resulting observables, and then hunt the validated set in Defender XDR tenant telemetry before selecting response actions. Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence is the external intelligence layer for researching an internet host and pivoting through related infrastructure and reputation evidence. Those relationships help analysts expand and assess the observable set. But a relationship is not automatically a malicious verdict and does not prove that Fabricam encountered it. After validation, Defender XDR Advanced Hunting, or the relevant tenant investigation surface, establishes local sightings. Only then should the analyst choose proportionate indicators or other response actions. This sequence keeps external infrastructure assessment, tenant exposure evidence, and enforcement as distinct decisions. Keep 3 claims separate. Defender Threat Intelligence expands and assesses external infrastructure. Defender XDR telemetry proves tenant encounters, and indicators enforce a decision only after the observable has been validated. Question 30 of 45. Following an authentication method compromise, Contoso must restore access for one administrator who has no usable strong method. Prevent a contractor population from registering SMS while retaining Microsoft Authenticator, and remove one user's stolen passkey without deleting that user's other registered methods. The response must operate at the authentication method layer and avoid broad session or application policy changes. Match each response requirement to the configuration or action that satisfies it. Each target may be used once. Some targets are not used. Requirements. R1. Provide the locked-out administrator a time-limited bootstrap credential that can satisfy first sign-in and register a replacement passwordless method. R2. Allow contractors to continue using Microsoft Authenticator, but prevent that population from registering or using SMS as an authentication method. R3. Delete only the stolen passkey credential from the affected user's registered authentication methods and preserve the user's other methods. Targets. T1. Set conditional access sign-in frequency to every time for all cloud apps. T2. Issue a temporary access pass under an enabled, appropriately targeted temporary access pass policy. T3. Open the user's authentication methods and delete the specific passkey method identified as compromised. T4. Require the user to re-register multi-factor authentication, clearing all MFA method registrations as the selective passkey removal action. T5. Target the SMS authentication method policy so that the contractor group is excluded or disabled while the Microsoft Authenticator policy remains enabled for it. Lock in your answer. The complete correct mapping is R1 maps to T2. Provide the locked-out administrator a time-limited bootstrap credential that can satisfy first sign-in and register a replacement passwordless method. Maps to issue a temporary access pass under an enabled, appropriately targeted temporary access pass policy. R2 maps to T5. Allow contractors to continue using Microsoft Authenticator, but prevent that population from registering or using SMS as an authentication method. Maps to target the SMS authentication method policy so that the contractor group is excluded or disabled, while the Microsoft Authenticator policy remains enabled for it. R3 maps to T3. Delete only the stolen passkey credential from the affected user's registered authentication methods and preserve the user's other methods. Maps to open the user's authentication methods and delete the specific passkey method identified as compromised. Temporary Access Pass is the purpose-built, time-limited bootstrap method for a user who must sign in and register a new, strong, or passwordless method without relying on an existing one. Authentication method policies control method availability for targeted populations, so the SMS policy can exclude or disable contractors independently of the Microsoft Authenticator policy. Registered methods are discrete credentials on a user object. Deleting the identified passkey removes that credential without requiring all other methods to be cleared. Conditional access session frequency controls reauthentication cadence, not method registration, while require re-register MFA is broader than a selective credential deletion. Match the object being changed. Bootstrap a locked-out user with temporary access pass. govern population eligibility in each authentication method policy, and contain one stolen credential by deleting that specific registered method. Session controls solve none of those scopes. Question 31 of 45. During a compromise review, auditors find that eligible security administrators can activate the role for 8 hours after entering only a justification. The incident response policy requires every future activation of that role to be approved by either of 2 active duty managers and to expire after 1 hour. Eligible assignments for other Microsoft Entra roles must retain their existing activation controls. The PIM administrator must implement the change without converting responders to permanent active administrators. Which action should the administrator take? Option A. Edit the tenant's PIM settings, require approval for all eligible role activations, and set a 1-hour access review recurrence. Option B. Replace each eligible security administrator assignment with a 1-hour time-bound active assignment and require the assignee to renew it through access reviews. Option C. Keep the security administrator activation settings unchanged and add both duty managers as permanent privileged role administrators so they can monitor activation notifications. Option D. Edit the security administrator role settings in PIM, set the activation maximum duration to 1 hour, require approval to activate, and select both duty managers as approvers. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Edit the security administrator role settings in PIM, set the activation maximum duration to 1 hour, require approval to activate, and select both duty managers as approvers. PIM activation controls from Microsoft Entra roles are defined per role. Editing the security administrator role settings therefore changes only that role's eligible activations. Requiring approval, naming the 2 duty managers as approvers, and reducing the activation maximum duration to 1 hour directly enforce the required gate and lifetime while preserving eligible rather than standing access. Access reviews govern whether assignments should continue. They do not provide the requested activation time approval or session duration control. In PIM, locate the control at the role policy layer. Activation approval and maximum activation duration belong to that role settings, while assignment expiration and access reviews govern whether the underlying assignment persists. Question 32 of 45. Contoso assigns the strict preset security policy to all users. During malware response exercises, the isolated detonation mailbox must instead use a custom safe attachments policy with dynamic delivery, so analysts can inspect the message body while attachment scanning continues. The administrator creates that custom policy, scopes it to the detonation mailbox, and gives it priority 0. But test messages still receive the strict preset policy's safe attachments action. Protection for every other user must remain unchanged. What should the administrator do? Option A. Disable safe attachments in the strict preset security policy, then recreate its attachment action in a custom policy for all other users. Option B. Exclude the detonation mailbox from the strict preset security policy and keep it included in the custom safe attachments policy. Option C. Lower the custom safe attachments policy priority number below 0, so it is evaluated before the strict preset security policy. Option D. Add the detonation mailbox to the standard preset security policy, because standard and custom policy settings are merged for the same recipient. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Exclude the detonation mailbox from the strict preset security policy and keep it included in the custom safe attachments policy. For the applicable threat policy types, the strict preset security policy is evaluated before custom policies, regardless of a custom policy's numeric priority. As long as the detonation mailbox remains in strict scope, the custom safe attachments action cannot override strict for that recipient. Excluding only that mailbox from strict makes it eligible for the scoped custom policy, while all other users remain protected by strict. Policy settings from multiple applicable policies are not merged to produce a hybrid result. When a highest priority preset policy masks a custom threat policy, do not keep tuning the custom priority. Remove the exceptional recipient from the preset scope, then let the narrowly scoped custom policy apply. Question 33 of 45. A custom high-severity alert policy detects a mail flow activity associated with possible data staging. During an active incident, the activity triggers hundreds of alerts that analysts must retain in the Defender portal for correlation and status tracking. The on-call mailbox, however, must receive no more than 12 notification messages from this policy per day. After the 12th message, portal alerts must continue to be created. The activity threshold, aggregation behavior, severity, monitored users, and enforcement policies must not change. Which configuration meets the requirement? Option A. Create an Exchange Mailflow rule that deletes notification messages after the first 12, and leave alert policy notifications unlimited. Option B. Set the alert threshold to 12 activities per day, so the 13th and later activities remain visible as separate portal alerts without email. Option C. Disable the alert policy after its 12th daily alert, and enable it automatically at the beginning of the next day. Option D. Set the alert policy's daily email notification limit to 12, and leave the alert trigger conditions unchanged. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Set the alert policy's daily email notification limit to 12, and leave the alert trigger conditions unchanged. An alert policy's email notification settings are separable from its alert trigger logic. The daily notification limit caps emails sent for alerts from that policy after the specified maximum is reached, while administrators can continue to view generated alerts in the Defender portal. Keeping the activity, threshold, aggregation, scope, category, and severity settings intact preserves the evidence stream and changes only the noisy delivery channel. Threat or mail flow policies are enforcement layers, not substitutes for alert notification control. Separate detector output from its paging channel. An alert policy threshold decides when alerts exist, whereas the daily email notification limit caps messages without turning off the portal evidence stream. Question 34 of 45. Threat Explorer identifies all delivered copies of a malicious invoice campaign. Contoso requires two-person control for email deletion. The investigator may define and submit a soft delete remediation, but a different responder holding security administrator and search and purge must authorize execution. The first responder has queued the action, yet messages remain in mailboxes and the responder cannot find an execution result in Action Center history. What should the second responder do next? Option A. Open Action Center pending. Review the queued remediation and approve it. Then verify its resulting status in Action Center history. Option B. Approve the associated Defender XDR incident so that all pending email actions correlated to the incident execute automatically. Option C. Open Action Center history and retry the action because every queued Explorer remediation executes before it appears on the Pending tab. Option D. Rerun the Threat Explorer query and submit a separate hard delete action because soft delete cannot use two-step approval. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Open Action Center pending. Review the queued remediation and approve it. Then verify its resulting status in Action Center history. With two-step approval, the investigator's remediation is a proposal rather than an executed mailbox action. For Defender for Office 365 email remediation, the approving responder needs the documented security administrator plus search and purge authorization. That responder reviews the proposal on Action Center pending, approves it, and then verifies execution in history. Incident status doesn't approve mailbox remediation. Read action center state as sequence evidence. Two-step remediation is proposed in pending, executed only after a separate approval, and then audited in history. Incident closure is not an email action approval. Question 35 of 45. After a QR code phishing incident, Contoso will run an attack simulation training exercise against a pre-approved responder group. The exercise must record compromise only when a participant submits credentials on the simulated site, not merely when the participant opens the message or follows the QR link. A selected remediation module must be assigned only to participants recorded as compromised. Users who only click must not receive that module. The two configuration choices can be made independently. Which two actions should the administrator take? Choose two. Option A. Configure the selected training module to be assigned to users with the compromised training trigger. Option B. Select the credential harvest social engineering technique and use a QR code capable payload. Option C. Select the drive-by URL technique because visiting its destination records credential submission without requiring an entry form. Option D. Configure the selected training module's assignment audience as all users, so reporting can later distinguish clickers from compromised users. Option E. Replace the simulation with a training campaign, because training campaigns record credential entry and QR link telemetry without delivering a simulated phish. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and B. Option A. Configure the selected training module to be assigned to users with the compromised training trigger. Option B. Select the credential harvest social engineering technique and use a QR code capable payload. Credential harvest models a phishing destination that collects simulated credentials, and it supports QR code payloads, so the compromise result is tied to the required participant action rather than message receipt alone. Training assignment can then be limited by the compromise trigger instead of being assigned to everyone or to users who only clicked. These selections are unordered and control different layers. The technique defines what behavior the exercise measures, while the training trigger defines which measured users receive the remediation module. In attack simulation training, separate measurement from remediation. Choose the social engineering technique that defines the compromise event. Then use the compromise training trigger to scope follow-up learning to that result. Question 36 of 45. During recovery from an identity compromise, Contoso enables SSPR for all users and configures the tenant so that one authentication method is required to reset a password. A non-privileged recovery test user can reset a password with Microsoft Authenticator. A security administrator who has the same registered method reaches SSPR identity verification, but is required to provide another method. Sign-in logs show no conditional access failure, and the SSPR configuration still shows one method required. The team must restore self-service recovery for the administrator without weakening protections or changing the user's role. What should the team do? Option A. Change the tenant SSPR setting to require two methods so that the administrator and non-privileged users receive the same reset policy. Option B. Exclude the security administrator from conditional access until the one-method SSPR policy is applied to the account. Option C. Remove and re-add Microsoft Authenticator because SSPR administrators can use one method after their existing registration is refreshed. Option D. Register a second authentication method permitted by the SSPR administrator policy for the security administrator, and then repeat the reset. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Register a second authentication method permitted by the SSPR administrator policy for the security administrator, and then repeat the reset. Microsoft Entra applies a separate, non-configurable, two-gate SSPR policy to accounts that hold specified administrator roles. That boundary explains why the non-privileged control account succeeds with the tenant's one-method configuration, while the security administrator is asked for another proof. Registering a second method allowed by the administrator policy satisfies the stronger recovery requirement without removing the role or weakening access controls. Conditional access does not set the number of SSPR proofs. Changing the tenant setting would broaden the effect to ordinary users without overriding the administrator policy. and refreshing a single registration cannot satisfy two gates. When an administrator is asked for more SSPR proof than a control user under the same tenant setting, recognize the immutable administrator two-gate policy and add eligible recovery evidence rather than weakening sign-in controls. Question 37 of 45. During ransomware containment, network responders isolate both registered Microsoft Entra password protection proxy servers from Microsoft Entra ID, but leave domain controller RPC paths to the proxies open. The identity team then adds a newly exposed campaign term to the custom banned password list. 2 hours later, a test password containing that term is still accepted by writable domain controllers that have healthy DC agents, while terms from the earlier policy are rejected. The team must enforce the updated list without reinstalling agents or disabling password changes. What should the team do first? Option A. Restore outbound connectivity from at least one registered proxy to Microsoft Entra ID. Allow a DC agent to request the updated policy and verify policy download and validation events. Option B. Clear the existing policy files from sysvol on every domain controller so the DC agents reject all passwords until the new list arrives. Option C. Run a Microsoft Entra Connect full password hash synchronization so the custom ban list is copied into the domain sysvol policy folder. Option D. Install the password protection proxy service on every writable domain controller because DC agents cannot use a remote proxy after the cached policy is 1 hour old. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Restore outbound connectivity from at least one registered proxy to Microsoft Entra ID. Allow a DC agent to request the updated policy and verify policy download and validation events. The DC agents are demonstrably enforcing their most recent locally available policy because older banned terms are still rejected. A newly edited custom list must be downloaded from Microsoft Entra ID through a registered proxy. The proxy is stateless and cannot provide an update while its cloud path is isolated. Restoring the minimum required proxy egress, allowing policy retrieval, and checking the operational event evidence repairs the failed dependency while preserving enforcement. Password hash synchronization is unrelated. A proxy is not required on each domain controller, and deleting cached policy removes useful protection without creating a cloud retrieval path. If old banned terms are enforced, but a new term is not, the DC validation layer is alive. Trace policy freshness upstream through the stateless proxy's cloud path before touching agents or cached policy. Question 38 of 45. Microsoft 365 restricts a compromised mailbox from sending after an outbound spam alert. A responder with the security operator role investigates the incident, revokes sessions, resets the password, removes a malicious inbox rule, and verifies endpoint containment. The mailbox remains listed under restricted entities, but the responder cannot select unblock. Just-in-time role activation is available, and the team must grant only a documented role that can remove the sending restriction, rather than assign global administrator. Which role should the responder activate? Option A, security reader. Option B, exchange recipient administrator. Option C, security administrator. Option D, compliance administrator. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C, security administrator. Removing a blocked user from restricted entities requires membership in a documented administrative role, such as security administrator or the Exchange Online Organization Management Role Group. Activating security administrator just in time gives the responder the required unblock capability without assigning global administrator. The remediation sequence is also correct. Secure the compromised account and remove persistence before lifting the service-enforced sending restriction. Read-only security access, compliance administration, and recipient object management do not confer this restricted entity's unblock permission. A completed compromise investigation does not itself confer transport remediation authority. For restricted entities, separate security operator investigation duties from the security administrator or organization management unblock permission. Question 39 of 45. Fabricam uses pass-through authentication, PTA, with password hash synchronization enabled for disaster recovery readiness. During containment, all PTA agent servers are moved to a network segment that cannot reach Microsoft Entra service endpoints. Microsoft Entra sign-in records for synchronized users now show authentication failures, while cloud-only emergency accounts still sign in. The incident commander expects password hash synchronization to take over automatically and wants to exclude users from conditional access. Operations must restore authentication through the intended primary method with the least policy change. What should the identity administrator do first? Option A. Exclude synchronized users from conditional access, so Microsoft Entra automatically retries their passwords against the synchronized hashes. Option B. Reset the affected user's on-premises passwords, so their next authentication request bypasses unavailable PTA agents. Option C. Restore the PTA agent's required outbound connectivity and verify that the agents return to active before retesting synchronized user sign-in. Option D. Force a delta password hash synchronization, because each completed cycle automatically changes the tenant sign-in method from PTA to password hash synchronization. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Restore the PTA agent's required outbound connectivity and verify that the agents return to active before retesting synchronized user sign-in. The split evidence isolates the dependency. Cloud-only accounts authenticate in Microsoft Entra ID, while synchronized users that depend on PTA fail after every agent loses service connectivity. Password hash synchronization can be enabled alongside PTA for readiness, but it is not an automatic failover mechanism. Changing to it requires an explicit sign-in method decision. Restoring the agent's required outbound path and confirming active status repairs the configured primary authentication plane without weakening conditional access or resetting credentials. A sync cycle does not switch the tenant method, and password resets still leave PTA requests dependent on an available agent. When every PTA agent is unavailable, do not mistake synchronized hashes for automatic failover. Restore and verify the agent channel, or make a separate explicit sign-in method change if recovery policy calls for it. Question 40 of 45. Contoso is responding to token theft affecting a non-persistent Windows 11 virtual desktop pool used by internal incident coordinators. Microsoft Entra ID protection shows risky activity for several coordinators, while Defender for Endpoint contains multiple device records with reused pool host names. The identity team and endpoint team must preserve evidence before changing risk state or rebuilding the pool. Emergency access accounts are cloud-only and are not used from the virtual desktops. Before enforcement changes are approved, the identity architect must produce two different forms of evidence: the risk detections and risky sign-ins that explain why each coordinator is considered risky, and the projected effect of a proposed conditional access user risk policy without interrupting current investigations. The evidence must remain reviewable, even if a responder later remediates or dismisses a user's risk. Which two planning actions meet these requirements? Choose two. Option A. Use the Defender for Endpoint device inventory as the authoritative record of Microsoft Entra user risk detections, because the incident includes virtual desktops. Option B. Export or otherwise preserve the relevant risky users, risky sign-ins, and risk detections evidence before responders change risk state. Option C. Configure the proposed conditional access user risk policy in report-only mode and evaluate its results in the conditional access reporting services before enforcement. Option D. Dismiss every current user's risk before exporting evidence so the policy simulation begins with no risky identities. Option E. Enable the proposed user risk policy immediately and use subsequent help desk tickets as the only impact assessment. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B and C. Option B. Export or otherwise preserve the relevant risky users, risky sign-ins, and risk detections evidence before responders change risk state. Option C. Configure the proposed conditional access user risk policy in report-only mode and evaluate its results in the conditional access reporting surfaces before enforcement. Identity protection investigation data and conditional access impact data answer different questions. Risky users, risky sign-ins, and individual risk detections provide the identity evidence behind a risk assessment. Preserving that evidence before an analyst confirms remediation or dismisses risk protects the incident record from a later state change. A separate conditional access policy in report-only mode evaluates how the proposed user risk condition and grant or remediation control would have applied without enforcing it during the investigation. The selections are complementary and unordered. One preserves the basis of the risk judgment, while the other measures prospective policy effect. Endpoint inventory can corroborate device activity, but does not replace intra-risk evidence. Separate the evidence that explains a current identity risk judgment from the evidence that predicts a policy's effect. Preserve risk detections first, then use report-only conditional access for non-enforcing impact analysis. Question 41 of 45. After the evidence export, network engineering proves that 2 anonymous IP risky sign-ins for one coordinator came from an approved emergency VPN egress address during a documented exercise. A separate leaked credentials detection for the same user remains under investigation. The analyst must correct only the 2 disproved sign-in findings without clearing the user's aggregate risk or suppressing the unrelated detection. Which identity protection action has the required evidentiary scope? Option A. Select the 2 established benign risky sign-ins and confirm those sign-ins safe, while leaving the separate leaked credentials detection and resulting user risk investigation intact. Option B. Dismiss the user's risk from the risky users report because that action is limited to the selected anonymous IP sign-ins and cannot affect other detections. Option C. Delete the coordinator's Defender for Endpoint VDI device records because removing the source devices automatically marks only their associated Entra sign-ins safe. Option D. Confirm the user compromised, so Microsoft Entra records the VPN sign-ins as false positives, but preserves the user's previous risk level. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Select the 2 established benign risky sign-ins and confirm those sign-ins safe, while leaving the separate leaked credentials detection and resulting user risk investigation intact. Confirm sign-in safe is the finding scoped adjudication for sign-in activity that investigation has established as benign. Applying it to the 2 VPN sign-ins corrects those findings without asserting that every risk attached to the user is benign. Dismiss user risk operates at the user level and is therefore too broad, while the independent leaked credentials detection remains unresolved. Confirm user compromised records a true compromised judgment and raises user risk rather than documenting a false positive. Defender device inventory changes do not adjudicate Microsoft Entra sign-in evidence. Choose the adjudication at the same scope as the disproved evidence. Confirm individual sign-ins safe when only those events are benign. Do not dismiss user risk while an independent detection remains open. Question 42 of 45. Endpoint engineering discovers that the non-persistent pool was cloned from a template virtual machine that had already been onboarded. Several clones therefore inherited the template's sensor identity and failed to appear as distinct current devices. The rebuilt pool must create a separate Defender device entry for each VDI session, so responders can bind evidence to an individual session. Which onboarding design should endpoint engineering implement for the rebuilt pool? Option A. Offboard the template place only Windows Defender ATP onboarding script.cmd from the non-persistent VDI onboarding package in the golden image startup script path, and configure it as a startup script so each session uses the multiple entry onboarding method. Option B. Keep the template onboarded, generalize it with the inherited sensor identity, and run the standard local script onboarding package only after analysts notice a missing clone. Option C. Delete the duplicate portal records and rely on Microsoft Entra Join during clone creation, because Entra device registration automatically onboards each session to Defender for Endpoint. Option D. Offboard the template, copy both onboard non-persistent machine.ps1 and Windows Defender ATP onboarding script.cmd, and use the single entry method because it creates a new portal object for every session. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Offboard the template, place only Windows Defender ATP onboarding script.cmd from the non-persistent VDI onboarding package in the golden image startup script path, and configure it as a startup script so each session uses the multiple entry onboarding method. A cloning template must not itself remain onboarded, because clones can inherit the same sense guide and fail to appear as new device entries. Microsoft provides a non-persistent VDI onboarding package and 2 identity models. For multiple entries, one for each VDI session, the documented implementation copies Windows Defender ATP onboarding script.cmd into the golden images group policy machine startup script path and configures it to run at startup. The 2-file PowerShell plus command configuration is the single entry method, which is designed to reuse a device representation rather than create the session-level evidence boundary required here. Microsoft Entra device registration and portal record deletion do not perform sensor onboarding. For cloned non-persistent VDI, first protect identity uniqueness by keeping the template offboarded. Then choose the VDI script variant according to the evidence model, 1 reusable device entry or 1 entry per session. Question 43 of 45. Incident responders create a custom URL indicator with action set to block for a newly identified command and control domain. The custom network indicator's advanced feature is enabled, and the indicator is in scope for a test Windows 11 device onboarded to Defender for Endpoint. Microsoft Edge blocks the domain, but a PowerShell process on the same device can still connect to it. Device configuration evidence shows that network protection is enabled in audit mode. The team must enforce the indicator for non-Microsoft browsers and non-browser processes while preserving the indicator's device group scope. What should the administrator change? Option A. Disable Microsoft Defender Smart Screen so the Defender for Endpoint indicator engine becomes the sole enforcement layer for every process. Option B. Change network protection from audit mode to block mode for the affected device scope, then retest the PowerShell connection. Option C. Enable EDR in block mode because it is the endpoint setting that enforces all custom URL and domain indicators outside Microsoft Edge. Option D. Change the URL indicator from block to warn because warn forces non-browser processes to terminate without user interaction. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Change network protection from audit mode to block mode for the affected device scope, then retest the PowerShell connection. Defender for Endpoint can use Smart Screen for Microsoft browsers, but custom network allow and block indicators for non-Microsoft browsers and non-browser processes depend on network protection running in block mode. The contrasting Edge and PowerShell results, together with the audit mode evidence, identify the missing enforcement layer. Changing network protection to block for the intended policy scope preserves the indicator's targeting and converts audited non-browser connections into enforced blocks. Warn is not stronger than block. Disabling Smart Screen removes browser protection, and EDR in block mode remediates post-breach artifacts, rather than supplying custom network indicator enforcement. When a custom domain indicator blocks in Edge but only audits a non-browser process, keep the indicator and its scope. Move network protection, the non-browser enforcement layer, from audit to block. Question 44 of 45. Contoso has disabled ordinary users' ability to create Microsoft Entra tenants after attackers used unmanaged directories for consent phishing. The detection engineering team now needs an isolated tenant for internal workforce identities, test applications, and conditional access validation. A platform engineer must be able to create that tenant, but must not receive global administrator in Contoso. The team is not building a customer identity and access management directory. Contoso is a paid customer, eligible to create an additional workforce tenant. Contoso is a paid customer, eligible to create an additional workforce tenant. Which two actions satisfy the tenant type and least privilege requirements? Choose two. Option A, create a Microsoft Entra workforce tenant for the internal users and organizational resources. Option B, create an external tenant because any isolated directory containing applications and conditional access must use the customer identity tenant type. Option C, assign the platform engineer the Microsoft Entra tenant creator role in Contoso. Option D, create only an administrative unit in Contoso because an administrative unit provides independent tenant-wide subscriptions, domains, and conditional access configuration. Option E, assign global administrator in Contoso to the platform engineer because only that role can create a tenant when tenant creation is restricted. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A and C. Option A, create a Microsoft Entra workforce tenant for the internal users and organizational resources. Option C, assign the platform engineer the Microsoft Entra tenant creator role in Contoso. Tenant creator is the purpose-built role that allows tenant creation when ordinary creation is restricted. But it doesn't bypass the paid customer prerequisite supplied by the scenario. The requested directory serves internal employees, applications, and resources, so it is a workforce tenant. The creator becomes global administrator in the newly created tenant, not in Contoso. That scope distinction preserves the stated boundary. Resolve tenant creation questions on two axes. Tenant creator is the narrow permission when self-service creation is disabled, and workforce versus external tenant is determined by employee/organizational access versus customer identity scenarios. Question 45 of 45. Fabricam has removed all fabricam.example references from the old tenant and removed the domain. A third-party mail gateway is temporarily queuing inbound mail while public DNS remains externally hosted. Administrators must now verify the domain in the replacement tenant without changing the queued mail route. At cutover, they will direct new inbound mail to Exchange Online, then publish the two selector records required before enabling DKIM. Match each phase to the DNS change that directly satisfies it. Each target may be used once. Some targets are not used. Requirements. R1. Verify fabricam.example in the replacement tenant while the external gateway continues queuing inbound mail. R2. At cutover, direct new inbound SMTP delivery for fabricam.example to Exchange Online in the replacement tenant. R3. Publish the two domain-specific selector destinations required before Exchange Online can DKIM sign outbound mail for fabricam.example. Targets. T1. Replace the SPF TXT record with the Exchange Online include value. T2. Replace the domain's MX record with the Exchange Online protection target supplied for the replacement tenant. T3. Publish the autodiscover CNAME record pointing to autodiscover.outlook.com. T4. Publish the Microsoft 365 domain verification TXT record at the DNS host. T5. Publish the two selector CNAME records with the DKIM destination values supplied for the custom domain. Lock in your answer. The complete correct mapping is R1 maps to T4. Verify fabricam.example in the replacement tenant, while the external gateway continues queuing inbound mail. Maps to publish the Microsoft 365 domain verification TXT record at the DNS host. R2 maps to T2. At cutover, direct new inbound SMTP delivery for fabricam.example to Exchange Online in the replacement tenant. Maps to replace the domain's MX record with the Exchange Online protection target supplied for the replacement tenant. R3 maps to T5. Publish the two domain-specific selector destinations required before Exchange Online can DKIM sign outbound mail for fabricam.example. Maps to publish the two selector CNAME records with the DKIM destination values supplied for the custom domain. A custom domain can be verified in only one Microsoft 365 tenant at a time. So the scenario first removes all references and the domain from the old tenant. The Microsoft-provided TXT record then proves control in the replacement tenant without changing the temporary gateway route. At cutover, the MX record directs new inbound delivery to Exchange Online. After mail flow is stable, the two domain-specific selector CNAMEs satisfy the DNS dependency for Exchange Online DKIM. SBF and AutoDiscover serve different purposes. A tenant-to-tenant domain move has an ownership boundary. Remove the domain from the old tenant first, queue mail externally during the gap, then verify, change MX, and publish DKIM selectors. You finished MS-102 Set 3. Treat every miss as evidence. Group misses by service boundary, identify the constraint you overlooked, and answer again from the requirement. That practice builds Microsoft 365 administrator judgment. Thanks for practicing with WebLizard Cert Lab. Review the full exam clues, revisit weak objectives, and continue with MS-102 Practice Exam Set 4 when you are ready.